a poem written by Hila Ratsabi, director of ritualwell.org, called We See You for Ukraine. Crowded in a subway station in Kharkiv, a student from another country clutches a dog to her chest, answering the reporter's questions as men rush down the stairs, interrupting the interview. Toddlers in snowsuits on blankets, teenagers heads down to their phones, mothers' eyes looking everywhere. Sveta says she grabbed her documents and cash. She has a car, but nowhere to go. As she speaks, a boy in a blue winter hat and black framed glasses, a few years older than my oldest son, peeks out from behind her, smiles shyly as he eyes the camera. A man stands behind him with his backpack pressed against his chest, holding himself. We see you in our living rooms, at kitchen tables as we pack lunches and perform our morning routines. We watch helpless, holding your faces to our hearts as we tend to the small luxuries of the mundane. We fear from afar the brutal waste of war, the extravagant arrogance of power. We rage at the rage of men who refuse to see you, or rather choose to see through you and thereby refuse to see themselves. We see you, see the subway train stalled at the station, the indefinite pause of commute. We see you huddled from the thunder of bombs whose distance from you is incalculable, but near enough to tremble the heart. We tremble with you. From across the world, we hold you close, not with thoughts or prayers, but the presence of the heart, a commitment to witness a dedication to peace. We see you, we hold you, we will not leave your side. To which I add, Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start with that because I think that that reading is very much in keeping with a theme of Purim, which is assimilation and being part of another culture, being accepted, feeling that everything is all good and that you're safe. And then it just turns out one day that you're not. And so that's what I hold in my heart as I think about this occurrence and celebrating this holiday, which for us is a happy celebration. So we are going to do something a little bit unique. We're going to experience Purim sort of through the ages. And we're going to visit Esther and Mordechai's tomb today, which is really a place. And we would like to take you there. It's in the Kurdish region of Iran. It's a wonderful video that my husband found and that Nina wrote a narration for. So the video itself with the narration that I'll do takes probably 6 minutes. So get comfortable. And if you could kindly mute, if everyone could please mute, that would be helpful so that we don't have any background noise.
Join us as we visit the tomb of Esther and Mordechai. For centuries, Iranian Jews have marked the holiday of Purim by making a pilgrimage throughout the year, but especially on Purim, to a shrine in the city of Hamadan, where, according to tradition, Esther and Mordechai are buried. The origins and contents of this shrine are cloaked in legend and mystery. Hamadan is in the Kurdish region of Iran. Mount Alvand, which overlooks the city proper, hosted the summer residence of Persian royalty of the Achaemenid Empire, the period when the Purim story is believed to have happened. Tradition has it that Esther and Mordechai, after spending their final years at the royal resort, were buried in the city, next to one another, with a shrine constructed over their graves. While the original shrine's date of construction is unknown, its date of destruction at the hands of Mongol invaders purportedly occurred in the 14th century. Historian Ernst Herzfeld contends that the current structure may actually belong to Shushan Dokht, the Jewish queen of King Yazdegerd the First, circa 399 to 420 CE, who is credited with securing permission for Jews to live in Hamadan. Herzfeld dates the current structure to 1602 CE, partly on account of its traditional Persian architectural style, which was ubiquitous amongst the shrines of Muslim regions leaders built in that era. In most cases, these buildings include an entry hall and a main square hall with a domed ceiling that surrounds the sarcophagus. For centuries, Iranian Jews, Muslims, and Christians, particularly women praying for fertility, cherished the modest brick shrine. The first detailed accounts in the historical record are from Christian tourists in the 1800s and early 1900s. These records, which include outstanding illustrations, descriptions, and even photographs, were recently digitized and provide a rare glimpse into the condition of the shrine in the past and the particular observances once held there. One 19th century visitor describes a marble plaque on the interior dome walls, claiming that the structure was dedicated in the year 714 CE by the two benevolent brothers Elias and Samuel, sons of Ismail Kachan. Other visitors describe rooms covered in pilgrims' graffiti in various languages, as well as darkened by candle smoke. A stork's nest sitting atop the shrine's dome and a prayer area within that was designed to enable worshipers to face the tombs and Jerusalem at the same time. They also recount that notes in Hebrew script were placed near the tombs, similar to how Jewish worshipers often tuck prayer notes into the stones at Jerusalem's western wall. For Iranian Jews who could reach Jerusalem only with great difficulty, the shrine served as a stand-in place at which to pray and weep. Until the 1970s, the shrine was hidden away in a crowded part of Hamadan, surrounded by houses and accessible only through a narrow dirt alley. But in 1971, in honor of a national celebration of 2,500 years of Iranian monarchy, the Iranian Jewish Society commissioned an architect to undertake a renovation. Houses around the tomb were purchased and demolished, making the shrine accessible from the main street via a bridge constructed over the new courtyard and a partially underground synagogue chapel that was also built to complete the shrine complex. The renovation did not significantly alter the shrine itself or the gravestones cluttering the plaza outside the old shrine. Some prominent local Jews had in the past secured burial plots outside the shrine, which they considered holier than plots in the main Jewish cemetery in Hamadan. We are also told that the architect preserved a front door, a massive piece of granite with a hidden lock. Less than 4 feet high, the stunted door frame forces visitors to bow as they enter in deference to the holy occupants that are in the site. The chamber inside also houses a cabinet with a 300-year-old Torah scroll and also the two curved sarcophagi, supposedly marking the burial spots of Esther and Mordecai. Today, Esther's tomb has lost some of its former splendor, and Iranian authorities, for example, have removed an ornamented gate along the sidewalk because it had a geometric motif that had a Jewish star as part of it. This was considered intolerable, like the Star of David, and not visible from the street level. The architect himself lives in exile, having fled after the Islamic Revolution and restarted his architectural practice in Los Angeles, though he dreams of returning to see the site transformed. The question of whether the shrine actually marks the resting place of Esther and her uncle remains unanswered and is perhaps unanswerable. But one 19th century Christian pilgrim offered her own insight on the significance of the tomb and the 2,700-year-old Persian Jewish community that guards it. Beside the tomb of Esther, the lowly race she saved have kept loving watch through all the weary ages. More wonderful than any ancient monument are these Jews themselves, lineal descendants in blood and faith of the tribes of Israel, and the only vestige of the truly olden time, which entirely defies decay and dissolution.
I'm curious, because I've watched the video before, what people thought watching the video. What were your reactions to going through? The video itself is silent, so that's why you didn't hear any narration from their end. It's just a silent video. Any thoughts from anybody on what the experience was like? Lisa.
It's interesting because I had just learned about this shrine. There was a show, actually it's a Christian ministry, but they live in Israel, and they were showing different things about Purim. They were showing parades in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. And then they went to, or they referred to this shrine, and they had pictures. It's kind of like this video, like the outside and then the inside with the two well, call them graves or whatever. But yeah, I'd never heard about it. And then there's a lot more inside than was shown on what I saw on TV. So it's cool. I like I said, you learn something new each time.
Thank you, Lisa. Anybody else have any feelings when you watch the video, or any thoughts you had for yourself? Go, Audrey?
I was amazed at the age of it,
Yeah.
and a plaque that says 724, or something of that nature. So that's amazing to me, that something, a structure, I know it's not from 724, but the structure could still remain and be in the same spot. And I had no idea that it existed. I had no idea that there actually was a resting place of Esther and Mordecai. No idea. Which
And
begs
actually-
the question, why was she not buried with Ahasuerus?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the Esther's tomb today is not as ornamented as it was in the past. And actually there was a geometric pattern along the sideway that the renovator had done, and it was a common motif in many mosques, but part of the motif forms a Jewish star, and so the regime took it down. They insisted it be removed. So yeah, it was altered a little bit. Any other thoughts on seeing this? I think it was pretty awesome. I don't know, Nina, what did you think? Because we watched it also. I mean, did you?
Yeah, I've seen it a few times. Well, two things about it, and it's interesting. It kind of mirrors, and one of the things we're going to talk about is the what the Jewish people face today and what the Jewish people faced then. And if you just see what the regime did in terms, there's a Jewish star, as I think Reb Deb said, it's in the top of the dome. You can see it on Google Earth. That Jewish star is there, but the
Yeah.
Jewish star you could see on the fence, that's gone because the regime made them take it down. So I think it's an interesting comment that it's Mordecai and Esther's grave, if indeed it is. We're not 1,000% sure, but it's definitely some old grave from long ago. Probably them, or maybe another Jewish person who was also some sort of royalty later on. But either way, that we have this place and we have our traditions and our own symbols and rituals, and because we're in so many different places, because Jewish people live in different countries, we always have that push and pull with our host country. So it kind of represents that, and that's interesting. Yeah,
Norma, you're next. I just want to also add that in the past, some of the more prominent local Jewish people had secured burial plots outside the shrine, which they considered like the holy, the most holy place to be, buried. So, more holy than the Jewish cemetery that exists in Hamadan in this area. So you see, it is influential. Norma, and then Francine.
Well,
And then Roberta. Okay, go ahead.
based on what you found in this incredible shrine, some of the research that I've done for my presentation tomorrow, the archaeologists have dug up these ruins, and from the ruins have been able to recreate the different, the palace entrance, and other areas. And that's something I'll show on my presentation. But as far as Esther and Mordecai, from what I understand, where they were buried, it was when they were fleeing when the first battle to kill the Jews, because remember, the king couldn't undo that commitment. And so they were fleeing out of the royal area. And from what my research has shown is they wound up being buried in another spot. And it very well likely could be where this is.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. I know Francine wanted to comment and Roberta had her hand up too. Thank you, Norma.
Francine, you're muted.
You're muted, Francine. Yeah, just,
Okay,
yeah.
I guess I would just want to briefly say that I had not been aware of this tomb. So to me, it was enlightening to learn about this a few minutes ago. And in first learning about all of this and then seeing the photos of it all, it really took my breath away a little. And I think that the word that struck me is the word antiquity, the antiquity, which I couldn't help but feel very sad in that word as I saw that shrine, knowing who those people presumably were that are there.
Yeah, it's actually it's a very awesome thought. And here is a holiday of merriment and we're really silly and everything. But when you look at that, it just really kind of shifts everything. I know for me, and I was thinking that, and then you just said it. So you gave voice to what I was really feeling inside. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roberta, please.
I've always liked looking at archaeological things at antiquities, and they always move me. They're so old. And being in Jerusalem and going underground by the temple wall, by the Western Wall, and going to the very end where they were still working on it. The tomb of Ahasuerus and Esther brought back the same kind of feeling of awe and wonder that I saw at the temple in Jerusalem.
It is. It just really kind of grounds you in a place and really connects you, I think, to where where we come from and who we are. Any other thoughts on this before we go on with, we have some questions too. Nancy, what happened to your hat? It's gone.
It was hurting me. I was getting a headache. I had the opposite. I think it's so funny when, like I kept saying, we think it probably is her tomb, probably. And I love, like in Monty Python, when they end up worshiping his sandal or whatever, it's that somebody says, this is holy, and everybody, assumes it is, and then it turns out it's not. I don't know. To me, for Purim, I think that's funny. So
it's a little upside down. Yeah, it's a little upside down. Yeah.
I want to put in here, I was looking at this. I have a group that I do, and I led it today. And one of the things we talked about was whether it was or it wasn't, it was so significant to the people. That's where they put their rolled up pieces of paper because they couldn't get to the wall. And that's where they wanted to be buried. And, we were talking about the significance of just any ritual objects we have or anything that connects us closely to our tradition and our beliefs. And whether we know for sure who's there, it had a very important significance to the Jews who lived there and still even today. And it kind of shows our need to be connected to our traditions, in a really physical way, I think.
And what's interesting when you said that, I mean, whether they are or are not buried there, okay, but I'm thinking of the first Jewish education course I ever took was a lecture. Nina, I don't know if you knew Rabbi Munson here, when he was local here.
Yeah, in Montclair, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
first class I ever took, it was at some kind of a shuk thing. And his program was on the fact that there is no tomb for Moses that we can visit, and how significant that is, that they didn't want to like make Moses more important and sort of, make him into some figure that would be idolized or that would be, more holy than the divine. And so we don't know where Moses is buried, and I mean, we know where the patriarchs are supposedly buried. They're in the cave in Hebron, but how it is important to know, I think, where people are buried that mark our history. And when I was in Israel recently, our tour guide, the cab guy, said to me, "Would you like to see Oscar Schindler's tomb?" And he said, "I'll take his grave." And he took me, and there's a big sign that says Oscar Schindler's, there's like a little area there. And I went down, he gave me time. I walked around, I took some pictures. I saw the stones on his headstone. And to me, that really connected me with my past and with my family that had, perished in the Holocaust. And it meant a lot to me that there was a place. So for me, a place is good, and I know if there's no place, that could mean Moses is buried anywhere in the land. And that's a good image for Moses because he was, sort of the one that took us into the land. So that's interesting, but I just wanted to mention my thoughts on that. So we have some questions. Little to think that you could get away with no thought-provoking questions about Purim. So the first question that we thought of is, if Esther and Mordecai were to come back to life today and exit this tomb, their surroundings might look different, but they might recognize some aspects of human nature that haven't changed. And we were wondering what you thought they would recognize, what might be the same today that would be what they would see then, or interact with then, or feel then. I got interesting answers to this one when I've asked before. Audrey, what do you think?
In most cases, I think they might find it interesting that in most cases, men still rule the roost.
Okay.
Especially if they're coming out in the particular part of the world where they're exiting.
Yeah.
Anybody else? What else do you think? Lori?
I think that I would assume that they would just, in response to my Aunt Audrey's comment, I think that's the assumption, that they would assume that men are still ruling the roost. But I think they would be surprised at how many women are moving ahead in this world today. I think that would shock the average person from any time in the past. I mean, even if you just went in the past 100 years, I think that the men of this world would be shocked by how far women have advanced. And that I think is a wonderful thing, that let them be shocked to see what women are doing in this world today.
And I wonder what Esther would think, being that now women are, clergy people, and women are, vice president, and, all of that stuff. So, yeah. Let's see, Francine, you have your hand up, and Roberta.
Yes.
Yeah.
Men make wars.
Uh-huh.
Lots of testosterone making wars.
Yeah.
Women should be at the peace table.
I hear you. Roberta?
Oh, I just, sometimes I think about my grandparents, and they came from Russia, actually near Odessa and in Belarus. But I think they would just be totally surprised by cars and trucks and planes and telephones. I mean, all those things weren't there when my grandparents first came.
Yeah.
Well, maybe cars, but certainly not airplanes or
Yeah.
all that. So, the noises, I think the noises of the environment would really be a shock.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had said the other day that my grandmother came from Russia, both my grandparents, and my grandmother left at age 16 to travel with a chaperone. And she came through Harbin, China to come, to eventually get here. And then my Russian cousins came, one of them came for a visit in 72 or 73, whatever. And she loved it so much that they applied for visas to come back as a family. And it was a pretty rough wait, because once they applied for the visa, they all lost their jobs. and they had to live in a 2-room apartment, 9 of them, walk up. And it was really rough. And then they finally got out through Israel and Rome, and they came to the United States. But yeah, it's everyone's story. I was telling it to somebody today, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's everyone's story. What's so special about that?" But it's when it's yours, it's special and it means something. The pictures shifted. Roberta, I think it was you. You moved from, yeah.
Yeah, they did. My grandmother came through Japan from, she took the railroad all across Russia.
Yeah. And Norma, your hand is up and Francine's hand is up again. So let's circle back.
You asked what they would find would be the same also. And I think they would find that mankind is still greedy. And the fact that we really haven't grown that much in that area, which is interesting to me. But you talk about how families came here. My grandmother and her family, they climbed through the window as the Cossacks were breaking down the front door and ran through the woods until they managed to work their way up into Canada and then down, because the United States wasn't taking Jews, the quota at that time. And they had to go down through Mexico and then back up to the United States. Yeah, it was a schlep.
Yeah, what a schlep. Yeah. Francine, back to you. You're unmuted, so you're good. Yeah.
My hand was up by accident, but that's not a problem.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just say, what would they be surprised about? Nuclear reactors, nuclear bombs, nuclear threats, nuclear Putins. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, didn't mean that. Whatever. They wouldn't understand, and that there are people who threaten to use them.
Yeah, my grandmother came from Donetsk. So, particularly, knowing what went on there already that's gone on and it's in the past in history for a couple of weeks already. Diana and then Lisa. I see both your hands. Diana, you look gorgeous.
Thank you. My wedding dress.
Beautiful.
It's my wedding crown, and this is the train that I had, a long train to my dress. I wore it last year for Hadassah's Purim party. So I figured I'd change today. First I was Chinese and now I'm a bride. I never knew, I knew that my grandparents on my mother's side left from Russia. And I knew my mother was born along the way, but my sister, when she was cleaning out my mom's condo after she passed away, she found a letter stating that my grandmother and her 2 sisters, they literally took a cart, like you see in Fiddler on the Roof, taking your belongings and walking. My grandmother, my Bubby, I called her, because that was what we called my mother's parents, and my other grandparents, we called grandma and grandpa. So she found a letter stating that they literally took a push cart and 1 suitcase and they left Russia. And my grandmother was pregnant with my mother, and my mother was born along the way in Poland. I knew that my mom was born in Poland, but I never knew the whole story.
Wow.
And my sister has it down, and I keep asking her, please send me that letter. I want to see it.
Wow.
And then someplace after they were able to travel with my mother after she had the baby, they got on a boat somehow and they went to Ellis Island, and that's how they came to the United States. I do not know what my mother's parents, father did, my Zadie, but I know that my father's parents, my grandfather, he was a seamstress operator. And they came from Russia when they were kids. I always thought that they were married in Russia, but they got out before the Holocaust. Their parents sent them to the United States, and he was a tailor, and he did Born with the Wind dresses.
Oh, wow.
He
Oh,
did the
wow.
gowns
That's amazing.
literally. And my grandmother used to have on her bed a doll with a dress that my grandfather made. And then
Wow.
when my daughter was born, she was the first grandchild. My grandmother gave her the doll. And I have the doll here in my house because my daughter has 2 dogs and she doesn't want it destroyed.
You're saving the life of the doll. Yeah.
But we were recently looking at the doll. We were recently looking at the doll to see if there was any, markings or anything on it. It wasn't. And one of the arms looks like it's about to come out. It's like so old, the doll, but it just sits in my living room on my hope chest.
Wow.
So that's how my grandparents on both sides were done.
Thank you.
So
Now my screen has shifted 3 times. I think Lisa was the next one that had her hand up. Lisa, am I right?
I had my hand up, but that was a mistake. It's hard to do on my phone.
Okay, all right, because I didn't want to miss you, and I wanted to throw another question into the mix here while we're sharing. Francine, please go ahead. Yeah.
I would just like to know how the practice of getting dressed up and wearing crazy things on our heads and everything, where did that come from?
Do you know, Nina, how long ago it dates back? You're muted. When the
Sorry.
hostess is muted, you know you have a problem.
I was trying to not make the noise from the video because there's some background noise in it. We borrow a lot of customs from other cultures. I'm not sure if the dressing up is part of it. I know that the masks are because so many things are hidden on Purim, and I'm going to look up the other part. And I know that we're supposed to drink until we don't know Haman from Mordechai.
Mordechai.
And that may be where we got the crazy costumes, but I am going to double check. I had a Purim party for my kids when they were little, and they went up and down the street giving mishloach manot baskets to the neighbors who were so confused because it's like the opposite of Halloween. Here are kids in costumes giving us candy. They just didn't know what to make of it. So I'm going to find out the answer before we're finished today, because that's a great question. Norma, you probably
I'm just
unmute.
Trying to Google, but it doesn't say.
Norma's going to tell us all. Norma. Unmute,
Yeah,
Norma.
I don't know it. Yeah, does anybody? If no one has an answer, I'm going to add another question to my. Go ahead, Norma.
It comes from medieval times in Italy when we Jews were there, and it was right before what we call Mardi Gras. It was Lent at that time.
That's right.
The Christians were dressing up, and so it was borrowed. The masks and the costumes were borrowed from the Italian during the medieval times.
That makes complete sense, actually, now that you think of it, because we're in Lent. I mean, it is Lent time now. Lent just started. Yeah. Thank you, Norma. We learned something new tonight. Thank you very much. So let's ask another question to factor in.
This here is a mask which they use in Mardi Gras.
Oh yeah, that's what you showed before. I love that mask. That's beautiful.
The thing is, a lot of the vendors along the street there in Venice do not take credit cards, and we had very little money left in euros. The woman was really nice. She took whatever we had left and gave us this. This was supposed to be like another 10 or 15 euros or something, and she says, "Here, since you're so nice, I'll give it to you for what you have." But she took our money, and that's the only reason why I have a small one. Otherwise, we would have brought a bigger one home.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But this is actually from Venice, so you get to actually see a mask from Mardi Gras.
Cool.
I have a question. It's a little out of sequence, but I want to make sure we get to this question. What people would Esther and Mordecai relate to, do you think? Who would they relate to today? Think about their history, think about sort of what they, how the trajectory of their development went. And who do you think they would feel sort of comfortable with and feel were simpatico, if you will, to them? I often think about this question, you know, who would they really feel a connection with? And I have a thought, but I want to wait and see what other people say. Knowing what they've been through, knowing who they were and where they came from, and what the barriers were for their lives, you know, how they lived. Who do you think? Lori, what do you think?
I wonder if they would feel connected to the Spanish Jews that had to go into hiding. What are they called? The
Oh, the
conversos?
Moranos. Yeah, the
Yes,
conversos. Yeah.
Right. Because Esther was living in a hiding state. And I had never thought about that. That's a great question, Reb Deb. And that's the first thing that came to my mind, are other people who are hiding, which also makes me think about transgendered youth.
Yeah.
People that are living in hiding and in
Yeah.
fear of being who they are. And I'll just make one more statement. Especially there's some kind of legal thing going on right now where you're not allowed to say that you're gay in a state. And if you do say that, the teachers have to report you. And that makes me feel horrible back to Esther, you know, hiding who you are and in fear for who you are. So that's my 2 cents.
Lori, you know, that reminded me of women. It reminds me of women through the ages who were maybe bright, who were educated, who had to hide that because it wasn't, you didn't want people to know that about you, you know, and that's something that, you know, is very, you know, we could relate to that because I think, you know, many of us have grown up through the 60s, you know, at one age or another and saw a lot of what went on with women's rights. And it's just, you know, it's really difficult to see and to think about. And have we come that far? You know, and, you know, because it's really about passing, you know, how do you pass? You know, if you're hidden, how do you pass? And I'm sure for Black Americans too, you know, if they were light skinned, then they could pass and they were hidden and they could stay hidden. So it's a very socially relevant question, you know, who would they relate to? And I wonder if they would, on some level, relate to people who were refugees in another land, who came out of someplace else. And, you know, because the Jews originally were, you know, they were diaspora in Persia and they were living there, luckily pretty kindly. You know, they paid the taxes and they were okay. Roberta, you had your hand up? Yeah, am I right?
Yes, it reminded me of Barbara Streisand's movie Yentl.
Yentl, yeah. There's always someone that says that. Thank you for saying that because we would have missed it if you didn't say it.
Oh, thank you.
So from Jews today and Jews back in the day of Esther and Mordecai, do you think that they are treated differently today than they were then? What's the same and what's different from how they were treated? This is a hard question because it forces us to take a look at our society today and how we're all living. You know, are we living no differently in terms of how we're treated as Jews today? Or is it more covert and, you know, and it's not as overt maybe as in the past? Nancy, you had your hand up. Go ahead, please.
I think it's like it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. That it's in some ways, I mean, you know, we've made such progress that, but although, you know, to times when Jews were accepted and excelled and were in the higher echelon, that's throughout our history, and then they get kicked out.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's kind of like where we are. So I think the progress we've made would amaze them. But then, you know, we're always ready for the other shoe to fall.
Yeah, and we've lived that way all these years. You know, we're always waiting for the other shoe to fall because it never feels 100%. I can only speak for myself, and from what I've seen. Francine, your hand is up.
Yes, I think a big step now that exists now in the right direction for Jews and people of color and or whatever gender, whatever group, is that there are now laws that exist that can put a stop to behaviors that are not acceptable. I think that's the biggest. Now, how long it takes, will it happen? When will it happen? All of that, don't know. but at least those laws I know are in place.
And you're right, because in saying that, we have a process. It may take forever in some cases, but we have a process. And back then, I mean, there was really no process. And when the order was signed to exterminate the Jews, then once it was put into effect, he couldn't like change, the law was he couldn't change his decision, right? It was, and it was. And so what do? We have a process where it can be turned over, it could be amended, it could be updated, it could be, whatever we have. So I wonder, what do people think? Are we treated differently today than we were then? And what's the same and what's different? Which is a pretty, I'm interested in the answer to that. Audrey?
I guess I'm going to take what might be an unpopular stance here. In 1971 or 2, I moved from New York to Columbus, Indiana. And one of the most interesting questions I was ever asked was, "You're a what? I'd have never thought it." And my response would always be, "Really, why? Tell me why." And undoubtedly I would hear, "Well, you're not pushy like the rest of them." And I would say, pushy? Do you think maybe it's urban mentality and too many people living together? So my stance is, and I don't think I'll be popular here, I'm telling you right now, I think we're still reviled as a group in much of the world and by many people. I would not choose to live in a place like Columbus, Indiana again. I'm going to say this out loud, but I'll deny it if you say it out loud to me. I'm in York, Pennsylvania. It's not 100% better, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
It's not what the rabbi made me believe it was going to be before we moved here. I still think that Esther and Mordecai would find the same violence and the same hatred. It's still out there. And I know it's not a pleasant thing to say, and I tend to try to rise above it and move beyond it on every day of my life. I love who I am. I love our people. And I think we're all ambassadors. And I have to make the absolute best show of my life to show other people our civility, our kindness, our humanity, our rahmanas, our compassion for life, and our need to do tikkun olam. We're ambassadors. And I decided that when I was living in Columbus, Indiana. And that's my thought.
Thank you. Nancy and Erica and Roberta. Okay.
I'm a Midwesterner. I'm logging in from Kansas City. I have to stand up for the Midwest. I hear you, Audrey. I think it's totally true. On the other hand, I was here when there was a shooting in the Jewish Community Center that they were trying to shoot Jews. It turns out they killed 4 people, none of whom were Jewish. And the outpouring of this community was unbelievable. That they had a vigil the next day, and all these, there's still an organization of non-Jews that is trying to promote interfaith understanding and stuff. So I think here somebody tried to shoot us. On the other hand, I think it's a different time because of the outpouring of community support. So.
Thank you. Erica, you're next.
Well, sorry, my voice is my voice is going. I don't know why. But even right now, we're in Florida. We're putting up big billboards, those pink billboards. I think it started in Boston, and we're doing it here in Florida, putting up big billboards. Saying like I can't think of right now. In my synagogue, we're putting up fences. Are you doing that in your churches? So we're kind of standing up more for each other.
and making the, making a stand,
Mhm.
which hasn't been done for a long time, very
Yeah.
often.
Thank you, Erica. And Roberta, you too had your hand up, am I right?
Yes, I think it depends where you are as to how, the level of anti-Semitism. When you moved to Columbus, Indiana, that was very close to where the Ku Klux Klan was founded. I think it was Martin something in Indiana. We used to drive through it, taking our son to school at Indiana University. At any rate, I think it just depends where you are as to the level of treatment, the anti-Semitism, also racism. So it just depends.
Yeah, the anti-Semitic things that are going on today are at a very much at an all-time high, unfortunately. And it's interesting in terms of what Audrey was saying. I was having a discussion today with a co-teacher of mine who's Christian. I work with somebody and we do Jewish Christian stuff. So we're teaching a class on the parables of Jesus. And our group is a mixed group. It's half Jewish, half Christian people. We get together every Friday morning for an hour and we study text and discuss it. We've been doing this like for 6 or 8 months now. So I'm, getting ready for the next class on Friday with my co-teacher. And she says to me today, I spoke with one of the participants in the class who's very, very upset with the Jewish participants in the class. She says that they're very pushy and aggressive. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, really? I mean, and, she said, I know that's a stereotype. She said, but, they do really talk a lot and make a lot of comments and, have a lot of things to say. And she said, and the Christian people in the group, like we have Methodists, Episcopalian, we've got like one of everything. So it's not, she said, they're just quietly sitting there accepting whatever is said. And I said, you have to understand, this is like not a Jewish thing. It's a cultural thing. I mean, it's not Christians against Jews, but we were raised to argue with the Torah, to dispute the levels, to look at different commentaries, to not accept something and say, okay, that's the answer. That's how it is. I said, we're not trained to study text like that. You would have to go back to like when I was 10 years old in religious school and undo everything I've learned since I was little and probably what the other people, too. And she said, well, I just feel bad because they're saying like the Jews are really pushy in this class. And, it was very difficult for me. I mean, I was really very careful because the same students in this class said that there was that the Christians never said that the Jews killed Jesus. And when that came up, I said to them, like, what world are you living in? Like, what planet are you on? Hello. I was beside myself. I was just, and the other Jews in the class said, but that's what we grew up with. That's what we heard all the time, and so it's just interesting because I think a lot of it is location. And a lot of it is the age of the people, because what context, historical context did they grow up in? And, and how educated are they? Because if they're educated, then they would know that, there's Nostra Aetate, for example, that took and changed that in the, in the Catholic religion and so on. So I think a lot of it is about who we are, where we are, and what time is it? What time of history is it? So I wanted to just look and see if my final question is, what lessons today? And I think it's a very relevant question. It's really a relevant question. What can we take today from the story of Purim? What lessons can we use in our lives today from what we saw in this story? Audrey?
Women need to be brave and stand up for themselves, number one. Number two, we have to have unity and take care of ourselves. I don't mean as women, I mean as Jews.
Mm-hmm.
We absolutely have to stand up for ourselves and not accept crap from the rest of the world.
And I think, Purim comes right after Shabbat Zachor. And Shabbat Zachor, which was this past Shabbat, is the Shabbat. Lisa, I see your hand. I'll call on you in 1 second. Just hang on. Is the Shabbat of remembrance, where we remember Amalek, who killed and beat down the old and the infirm and the children and the weak people at the back of the column when the Israelites were freeing slavery. And I think we have to remember that in our time, there's always an Amalek, and there's always a Haman, and there's always a Hitler, and there's always a Putin. And I will say no more, but our job is to stand up to that and to say we are not going to live like this. We won't take this, not this time around, each time around that we go around. Lisa, I don't want to leave you out. Go ahead, please.
This was a real hand raise. I'm going back, kind of like what you just said. I'm going back to the fact that Esther would not have known what needed to be done unless Mordecai had raised her the way she was. She was Jewish. She knew that there were certain things that she wouldn't eat in the palace or whatever, but it also has to do with the integrity, I think, of Mordecai, because he would not bow down. He would, you're not my God, you're not my God. And he took the time to really raise Esther in a Jewish way. So I don't think if he hadn't had that integrity, and if she hadn't absorbed what she'd been taught, it would have been a whole different story.
And I think you're right. And I think one of the things about Esther and Mordecai is that Esther had a great mentor, and she was mentored as a leader and to grow into her role as a strong woman and to really have a mission and not shrink back from that. It took a lot of courage for her to be who she was. And I think Mordecai was a very positive influence in her life, a very positive teacher. And that's very important. We look at that text in one of the Chai Mitzvah booklets. We have a whole section on women as leaders, and we look at Esther and her role in this story, and how Mordecai mentored her and how she spoke up as a strong leader. And it's a great text to study, particularly at this time of the year, to remember that. So we have concluded the formal part of our lesson, and I wonder if people have any closing comments before we wish you Chag Sameach and for a very happy Purim and fun Purim. And I just want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. This was just such a wonderful, wonderful way to spend an evening together. I'm so happy that we were able to do it. So Nina, thank you for the narrative you wrote to accompany the YouTube that my husband found. And, thank you all for coming and spending this night with us and answering questions. So any closing comments, please, anybody that would like to. Norma?
Unmute.
Got to take your,
I'm
yeah.
just sending hugs and shalom to everybody.
Thank
And
you,
just
thank
be
you,
healthy and safe.
thank you. Anybody else, or?
I love your hats. You look great.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Happy Purim.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Everyone, thank you
Night.
for joining us.
Night.